Today I'm joined by Melinda Moyer. She's a science journalist, parenting columnist, and the author of Hello Cruel World, a brilliant book all about raising kind, resilient kids in the middle of all the chaos. I'm excited to have you here. So thank you for joining us, Melinda. Start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what led you to writing the book.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm a science journalist and I have been for 20 years, gosh. And I started out like writing about hard sciences, genetics, immunology, all this nerdy stuff. And then I had kids
Yeah.
and I had so many questions. I wondered whether science could help me answer some of them. And so I started, doing lots of research to answer my own parenting questions. And eventually, this led me to a lot of science-based parenting writing and starting a newsletter and then writing books. And so Hello Cruel World is my second book. And it's really honestly inspired by my own anxiety and fear as a parent right now, raising kids in this world full of, rapid changes and challenges. And, I just found myself like up at night wondering, how am I going to raise kids? Like, what can I do to make sure that my kids have the skills they need to thrive and even survive in this world?
Yeah.
And so I did all sorts of research, and then Hello Cruel World is sort of the toolkit that I wrote to help parents, understand like how to foster the key skills that kids need right now.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And I can really relate to that, actually. I found once having had kids, I really felt the same. Like, it's such an overwhelming responsibility raising children. And the fact that we are responsible for, their mindset and how we blueprint them for the rest of their life. I did a lot of research too. And that's kind of what's led me to the podcast, to be honest, is through just reading hundreds and hundreds of books of just trying to get my head around, what can I do? How can I help? Resilience. I hear that word everywhere. How do I build it? How can I build self-esteem and confidence? It's a lot to take in as a parent, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, it just feels sometimes like you don't have much, like you don't know how much control you have and how much you matter and like how to, what is the best, if there is a quote unquote best approach, because everything is also contradictory. Like you'll read or hear one thing about what you should do, and then somebody else will tell you the exact opposite. And it's like, well, what do you listen to? And, or should you just trust your instincts? Like, and it can feel, I don't know, it can just feel scary sometimes. So
Definitely.
that's why I do what I do.
Doing it, isn't it? Sometimes I think I've read this and I know what I'm supposed to do, but I did not do that. I just lost it in the moment.
Yes, there's a lot of that too. Like, you can know what the research says. You can know what maybe you should quote unquote do in a situation, and then your own like emotions and exhaustion and whatever else get in the way, right? And suddenly you hear yourself saying something that you're like, I don't think I meant to say that, but here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. So you talk about raising terrific kids in terrifying times. But what does terrific actually mean to you? Is it kindness, resilience? What does it look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it is kind of a vague word and it can mean different things to different people. I really wanted to understand what could help kids both in terms of like their overall well-being. So mental health, I'm really interested, and I think we're so worried about kids' mental health. We're hearing all sorts of scary things about kids and teens' mental health these days. So I wanted to know, what can we do to raise kids who can remain mentally healthy, have healthy self-esteem, be resilient in terms of managing, being able to deal with what life throws at them. But I also wanted to understand like what helps kids relate and connect with others. So definitely empathy is in there. What can we do to help? Because we know that relationships are so important for humans throughout our lives. And so I wanted to understand what can we do to help kids foster healthy relationships. And then finally, like the last part of the book is like other kinds of life skills that I talk about, which is like, essentially, how do we help kids deal with the tools of the world, like social media, technology, money? How can we help our kids develop the skills they need to sort of navigate the various things they have to do and use in this world, and to stay like mentally healthy as they do that?
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And so throughout the book, you state that it's science-backed strategies. And as we've just said, there's so much parenting advice flying around. But what does the actual research tell us about what really helps our kids to thrive in the long term?
Yeah. So it's interesting. When I started reporting the book, so each chapter is like a different skill that I focus on. And I was really worried that I was going to find that, the things that parents should do to foster resilience might contradict the things that we should do to foster empathy. Or like, I was worried I was going to find contradictory information from the science about fostering various skills. And I was like, what am I going to do if that happens? And thank goodness that is not actually what happened. What I found was that I found a lot of themes, like broad themes that came out from the research, which I think was, for me, was really reassuring, because it's like, I feel like also sometimes we hear from, from parenting influencers, from social media, that like we have to get every conversation right. Everything has to be perfect or we're going to mess up our kids. And what I found was that it really is much more about like the ways in which we engage with our kids, like the kinds of conversations we have, these bigger picture things, and that the details don't matter so much. So, I mean, I would say one of the big themes in my book, there's a few, but one thing that comes back a lot over and over again is like letting kids have the feelings that they have, and letting them, and especially if those feelings are negative feelings, like letting them be frustrated, letting them be sad, and not always trying to fix that, not always trying to rescue our kids, not always trying to protect them from those feelings, because those feelings are where, like, when kids experience frustration or sadness or discomfort, that is when they start to, first of all, understand, what feelings feel like, and understand what other people might need when they have certain feelings. So it builds compassion, it builds empathy, it builds emotional literacy, but it also builds resilience, because when kids experience tough feelings, that's when they start to practice coping skills. And that's when they start to learn what makes them feel better and what helps them manage their feelings. And so we know that those are things that develop through, practice over time. And so it is actually, it's kind of the opposite of what we might expect, that like, okay, we think the best way to keep our kids mentally healthy is to protect them from sadness and frustration and discomfort. Like those are going to be bad for their mental health. But what we find is actually letting kids experience those feelings, in a safe atmosphere, obviously with our support, helps them build the coping skills that they will then be able to use throughout their lives and will ultimately keep them mentally healthy. So that is one of the big themes of the book.
And you're right there. I think you've hit on the key point as well. Doing that in a safe environment so that we can sort of guide them and support them whilst they're learning that lesson just makes all the difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Right. I'm not saying that we should be, exposing our kids to trauma and throwing them in the deep end of the pool when they don't know how to swim. Like that's going too far, and that's going to overwhelm our kids. And it's really about, letting them experience the little frustrations of life without trying to hover, without trying to protect them and rescue them from it. If they make a decision and it's going to have a natural consequence that's not great for them, like that's a learning opportunity. That's something good. So it's like, you want to, it's a balance, right? It's like you don't want to cause your kids like tons of undue suffering, but at the same time, we as a society, I think, because we're so worried about kids' mental health, we tend to now overprotect and prevent our kids from having like any kind of sadness, any kind of discomfort. And we can, I think, step back a little bit from that, and just, it's hard, right? Because it's not fun seeing your kid just,
it's your
struggling.
natural instinct to want to protect as a parent. But realistically, like the unknown is here and the kind of known is here, and the beautiful part happens here, doesn't it? And we don't want to deprive our kids of that by doing this. We want them to experience all the emotions and learn all the lessons and the tools and the skills to keep them resilient for themselves in adulthood.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. It's really more about preparing than protecting. That's one of the things I talk about in the book, like, and thinking, and also like, I find it helpful to zoom out and really think of like, well, what is our ultimate goal as parents? It's to help our kids become adults who have the skills they need to, deal with difficult things. And so sometimes taking yourself out of the moment, like, oh, my kid is sad right now and I want to solve that problem right now for them, and thinking
Yeah.
like, well, what's actually going to be the approach I can take that's going to build skills and help them in the long run. It's really about like taking that step back, like what's going to help them in the long run.
Yeah, so true, so true. What's actually going to help them build skills?
Yeah.
Um, you talk about in the book about modeling, and how our children watch everything, even when we think that they're not. So, no pressure. Um, can you share why what we do matters more than what we say?
Yeah. Yeah, modeling is really powerful. And I think we sometimes forget that our kids really are watching, and it's like even how we treat ourselves. So my first chapter is on self-compassion and why
Mhm.
that's so important and how to build it. And, kids are really paying attention to how we treat ourselves, and they're learning, okay, well, maybe this is, mom beats herself up when she burns dinner. Maybe that's what every time I make a mistake, I should be, putting myself down, treating myself badly. They really are paying attention, but I want to caveat this because, as you said, that sounds like, oh God, like you have to get everything perfect because our kids are watching us. I want to caveat this by saying that one of the things that's really helpful for kids to see is us making mistakes, and making mistakes in front of them, and taking responsibility in front of them. So like,
Right.
if you accidentally yell at your kid when you really didn't want to or mean to, that is actually a really powerful moment to then go up to your child and say, I'm sorry, I just yelled at you right now. I shouldn't have done that. Sometimes, I have these conversations with my kids when I make a mistake, and then they say, well, I'll say, well, what could I have done in that moment to help myself calm
Mhm.
down? And, and you can have these great conversations about like your own, emotional regulation, about what you do, what you could do, and also just like that moment of repair, like repairing with your kid when you make a mistake, can be
Mhm.
so powerful. So I just wanted to get that out of the way and say it's not about being perfect all the time. It's not about like having to, I don't know, seem like you're a robot who gets everything right the first time. Modeling is also about like owning up to,
I
making
guess it's
mistakes and
about
owning up to it.
modeling the resilience, isn't it? Modeling that you've
Yeah.
made the mistake and what we're going to do about it. I always say that to my kids. I don't mind that you've made a mistake. It's what you do about it that matters. How are we going to make amends here? What can we do?
Yes.
And if you take that approach with other people, they're usually pretty forgiving. If you say, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you, I got carried away, but you help them back up off the floor and you give them back the ball, people are pretty accommodating. If you stand there and go, well, I didn't push you that hard, you tripped, people get defensive, don't they? So it's
Right.
about kind of modeling that behavior so that they can learn it for themselves.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's really powerful. And learning and modeling that you learn from every mistake, like, oh, this is a growth
Yeah,
opportunity. I just learned that, uh that when I'm really tired, I sometimes am quick to explode. Like this is something I'm going to, this can help me make better decisions, or take care of myself better, or whatever it is. Yeah.
totally.
So,
And again, that's another one I've actually modeled to my kids, which has worked quite well, about, those moments when you've snapped and you've been tired. And then I've known that I can't blame them. It was all me. I was in the wrong. I was tired and they were really annoying. So to kind of go back and make that apology and say, mummy was really wrong. I shouldn't have snapped then. And I'm sorry for that. Have you got any ideas as to what I could do next time? And they're quite good at actually coming up with helping you find some solutions. Like, you could take a deep breath, you could leave the room,
yeah.
and therefore you can see that it becomes a really great learning opportunity for them, rather than it actually being just this negative moment where you've got a rupture in your relationship, because you've taken the time to build the repair and also thought about how they can learn from your mistake as well as you can.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Just even, I mean, you can kind of turn any experience, however, bad it feels to you, into like a conversation with your kids that is really, helps them learn, helps them understand, even just helps them understand your own perspective. Like saying, I was so tired. I'm sorry that I snapped. I'm really tired. This happened to me today. Like that is helping your child also take your perspective and say, oh gosh, I didn't even think about the fact that mom could be tired, and
Yeah.
this is she's got stuff going on in her life. Like all of those things are building other, it's building empathy, it's building theory of mind, which is essentially this incredibly important skill that involves being able to understand that other people have different feelings and experiences than you. So it's like just in having that conversation about like you apologizing, you saying, here's what happened, here's maybe why I got upset and I'm sorry, and all of that, you're teaching so many skills just in that conversation. It's so powerful.
It is powerful. You're so right. You cover some of the big modern pressures, such as social media, peer pressure, gender norms. What tools can parents use then to help their kids build self-worth and critical thinking in a world that's currently telling them who to be in some respects?
Mm, yeah, I know these are really big questions. So yeah, one of the things I talk about with social media, and just the way the world kind of works right now is that kids get the message that they should have like very strong opinions
Mhm.
about things, immediately, and that having a strong opinion and asserting yourself is rewarded and always rewarded, and that you should always, stick to like, I guess I should say there's little room for uncertainty and for keeping an open mind right now. We're just rewarded for having a strong take. So I think one thing that parents can do, and I talk about this in my book, and we know that it's helpful for reducing the chance for polarization and having these strong opinions, is to model being comfortable with uncertainty, to say
Mhm.
to your kids, they ask you a question, to say, I'm not actually sure if I know the answer to that. Let's research it together, and to show your kids that it's okay to not always have an opinion or have the knowledge, and that and this also gives you an opportunity to go research with your kids an issue, to show them how you use Google, to show them how do you choose what source to trust, like which answer to click on.
Yeah.
All of that can be really helpful for helping kids develop these critical thinking skills and understand the importance of sourcing and finding the right sourcing. Um, Another thing that's really interesting from the research is that listening to our kids with curiosity, like really listening to our kids' opinions, listening to their, whatever it is in their world that they find interesting, even if we don't find interesting, that is really also very powerful for building open-mindedness in kids,
Right.
and like a intellectual humility. So there's fascinating research that shows that when people feel heard, like they feel like they're really being listened to, they feel safer. And when you feel safe, your brain kind of opens up and allows you to consider other perspectives and consider other opinions. It sometimes helps to think about the flip side of this. Like if someone is breaking into your house,
Hmm.
you develop this tunnel vision, like, how do I keep my family safe? And that's the only thing you can think about, and everything else goes out of your
Yeah.
brain, because when you're not feeling safe, you develop this tunnel vision. You're kind of closed minded. You're like, there's only one thing I need to do here, and it is to keep my family alive.
Yeah.
So when you're unsafe, you develop this like closed mindedness. When you're feeling safe, it's like the opposite happens, and your brain kind of opens, and you're more willing to listen to other perspectives. And so just by being open-minded around our kids, by modeling this curiosity, this willing to hear them out, to listen to them, even if we don't totally agree with what they're saying and we wish we
Hmm.
could like correct them, to instead,
Yeah.
take that breath and let them say what they want to say, that can help them then be more willing to listen to us and be more willing to consider other
Hmm.
perspectives. So that was another really interesting area of the research that I'm trying to apply to my own parenting as much as I can.
I love that. You're so right, though. It's that kind of fight or flight, isn't it? So when
Yeah.
they're in a more receptive state, they're more willing to learn, to be curious and open-minded, and they're the teachable moments. But it is tough, isn't it, in your parenting? Because sometimes it's when we're in the more reactive moments and states ourselves, that's when we try to teach the lesson. But I guess by having that self-awareness, you can try and recognize. Like, I don't know, with my kids, I can actually often see it. I can see when like their neck goes up and their shoulders and they've zoned me out. and to recognize that actually I just do need to take a breath and to walk away. And this is not the moment to be having this conversation, even if there are other people's eyes on me or this has just happened. And to take that breath and to revisit the conversation at a time when, as you say, they are more open-minded to the conversation, and then they're more willing to listen to the lessons that I might have to teach or the guidance that I have to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You're paying attention to your kids' cues. And then, yeah, also just like letting them say their piece can help them kind of get more connected to the conversation
Mm-hmm.
as well. Like, so, because it's like when they know that you're in lecture mode, they're like, oh,
Yeah.
here goes mom. Like, I'm going to tune her out. But when instead, if we start by just asking open ended questions and, really being curious rather than asking questions just so we can jump in with like, no, that's wrong, or no, actually,
Yeah.
you should have done this. If we're actually just trying to absorb and understand what they're saying, they can sense that and they then engage more with us and are more willing to listen.
Yeah, I think is it Elaine Fiber and Julie King who talk about it in the How to Talk to Little Children books, where
Yeah.
they apply these things to your adult relationships. And that's always really stuck with me, actually, because if we take what you're just talking about and I was to put that to a conversation with my husband, when I truly feel listened to and heard, gosh, it feels like a weight off your shoulders, even if a lot of the time I know the answer to my problem and I really just want him to listen. And I think it's recognizing that our kids can feel the same and they're not always coming to us for us to fix them. And although we might feel like we want to as their parents, to kind of hold back on that and to do exactly as you say and to just hold space and to listen fully, even if we don't agree, so that they can get it off their chest and they can feel better and then maybe look to problem solve themselves. And that's where they're going to learn to build that resilience, which is
Mm-hmm.
exactly what we said is one of the skills we want to teach them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I remember years ago, I interviewed a bunch of psychologists who work with adolescents. And I said, what's the biggest mistake parents make? And they were like, parents think that when teens open up to them, that they should jump in with solutions, that they should always problem solve and try to fix the situation. And what teens often really want is just to be listened to, just to be able to vent, just to, for us to sit there and hold space and, maybe mirror back what we're hearing, but not to jump in with solutions and not to, or our own, agenda, whatever it is, like just stepping back can be so powerful.
Absolutely. So, lastly, I just wanted to ask you that, in today's world, so many kids really are suffering with anxiety. And honestly, who can blame them? With some of social media, it can, be quite anxiety provoking. And between the pressures of school and social media, it's a lot. So, what are some of the science-backed coping mechanisms really that can help manage stress in a healthy way?
Yeah. Um, Play is really powerful. That is the first thing I'm going to say. So, letting kids play, independently. I'm not talking about like playing soccer, really. I'm talking about like letting them go off into the woods, if that's safe, and letting them play with their friends or letting them play alone. That is an incredibly powerful way for kids to diffuse the stress and the anxiety that they're feeling. And I mean, it's just play is so helpful for so many skills. That's another thing, another of the themes that kept coming up in my book. Like, play can help build resilience, play can help build empathy, play can help reduce stress and anxiety. So that's a really big one. I think also our own parenting is sometimes so coming from a place of anxiety and
Mm-hmm.
fear, and our kids sense that. And I really had to work on myself because I'm a somewhat anxious person. And I found that whenever my kids wanted to do anything that involved any sort of risk, I would say, be careful, or, or
Yeah.
don't do this. Like this could happen. And I was always injecting this like anxiety into the situation and putting it on my kids. And I really had to learn to try to not do that, to try
Yeah.
to shut my mouth and say, it's not going to help. If telling them to be careful doesn't actually make them more careful either. That's the other thing. Like it
It's
doesn't do
crazy,
anything.
isn't it? But we all do that,
I
right?
know. We all do it. It
I
doesn't do
hear
anything.
myself say it, and I say to myself in my head, Karis, like,
Right. But yeah, so it's also about like trying to, again, what we were talking about earlier about stepping back a little in terms of not always rescuing our kids from discomfort and not always protecting them from every risk. Like, it is good for kids to do things that, might cause them to get a scratch or a scrape,
Yeah.
or, be in a situation that's a little bit uncomfortable. So that's another way I think that we can help protect, I guess saying the word protect is funny in this instance, but protect our kids from anxiety is by letting them, giving them some independence and not trying to sort of be overbearing with our own anxiety.
Mhm.
It's hard to do. It's really hard to do. But to the degree that we can sort of recognize we're doing it, at least that's the first step, and then maybe
Mhm.
take a deep breath instead of saying be careful, like that can be really helpful. Yeah, but it's a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge for me, I will say.
It is for us all. Do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
really is. And all we can do is try and be self aware and upskill ourselves as much as possible to, I guess, learn on the journey just as our kids are.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's a journey for all of us. We're all works in progress.
Absolutely.
And that is another good
Absolutely.
message for kids to have. We're all learning and growing and still making mistakes.
So true. So, my gosh, I mean, it sounds like an insane amount of research has gone into this book, and you've put a lot of effort into. Obviously, this is your second book, but it really is a great read with so much practical information for parents, and just those kind of lessons that we do need to learn and to upskill ourselves as parents, so that we can be offering the best version of ourselves to our children, which is what we're really aiming to do, and then modeling these skills ourselves to our children so that they recognize when we make mistakes that we can learn, and it's okay to be imperfect because we're all imperfectly human, and that's part of the journey. So, thank you for taking the time to put all of your research that you've done for yourself and your children into a book to benefit other people such as myself, and then hopefully the listeners on this podcast. So thank you for having the time as well to sit and have this chat and discuss the book, because that's been fantastic.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, thank you for the kind words about the book.
Lovely. Do you have any last final words of advice that you'd just like to offer to the listeners before we come to a close?
Uh, I will just say that I think parents are being bombarded with messages that are designed to make us feel terrified right now.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of those are not super accurate. And we know that we are better parents when we're not in this fight or flight, terrified, frame of mind. And so
Yeah.
anytime you hear something that just makes you panic and feel like you're doing everything wrong and you're messing up your kids, I would just say, try to take a deep breath and know that it's probably not that bad, that people are trying to sometimes make us scared for a reason. There's an agenda behind it. And I'm just more of a proponent of like hope and we can get through this rather than living in fear.
Love that. Absolutely. Brilliant advice to end there on. Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.